Hi, I'm here with Khalid, and this time we're going to reverse things a little bit. I'm going to be interviewed. So we'll see what happens, and I'm going to turn it over to Khalid.
All right. Hi, Tony. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to interview you. I'm very interested in education, and I want to ask you some questions about education this time.
Okay. I hope I'm ready. Okay.
And I would like to look at education from philosophical and political point of view today.
Okay.
And usually when I say that, I like to look at things that people take for granted and see as basic, and then sort of make them look strange, sort of reflect on them a bit. The basics.
Sounds interesting. Okay.
So the first question I have for you is, I would like for you to sort of, if you could tell me what is the traditional or even typical way of viewing education from an American lens. I mean, when we say education, what is meant by that?
In secondary education, we want to make good citizens. So that's why we have a focus on history, citizenship, social studies, and then you need the basic skills, math and science. And now they talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So there needs to be a big push for that. In part, secondary education can lead towards national objectives. When Kennedy announced that we were going to the moon, there was a huge push towards training people in high school for mathematics and science, and we scored the highest that we ever did in 1964 on the SATs.
Okay.
And as far as I know, I haven't looked at the stats recently, but I'm pretty sure that was the peak.
And the reason for that was because of that movement
The
pushed
big push
from the government.
The big push. Actually, I said, Kennedy, you need to take it back. There's not enough time there. Sputnik was the trigger. Oh my gosh, we're going to lose the space race.
Okay. So in
that's secondary education.
Right. So in that view, education was at that period was very political.
Yes, I would say it was, yeah.
And so and it was sort of, you mentioned about citizens, so you're tying education in a way to society. So you mentioned this goal of serving, some high-level agenda, national agenda. Could you elaborate more about what you mean in terms of tying it to society? Producing, you said, citizens?
Yeah, I mean, every culture has its own vision of itself. And so United States wanted to be world leaders. They wanted to defeat communism ideologically and physically, not wipe them off the face of the earth.
Right.
That's never a plan.
Right. The ideology.
Yes, the ideology. So going back to, even Hollywood piled on that in the 50s. That's why you had all these religious films. We need to have core values. We need to be centered. And not having been in higher ed at the time, I can't really speak about that, except that that was a time when higher ed was much more exclusive.
So given some of the things you've said, and given some of my understanding being here in the U.S., which is very similar, is how much freedom do parents and students have if education is so political, even in a country like in the U.S.?
Oh, well, they have freedom, but there's tremendous social pressure to, achieve something.
Okay.
But, and here we're probably going off the deep end, okay, because believe it or not, I got this idea from a cab driver in Chicago.
Okay.
He had a degree and was a lawyer, but he couldn't make ends meet. He was also driving a cab. He says the problem is, since 1989, is we don't have an enemy anymore. So what happened is success changed everything.
Okay.
So now that we don't have a, quote, national objective that's concrete, what do? At the same time, around this same time, deconstruction and questioning about the whole concept of national objectives, about the concept of core values, started to infiltrate much more deeply through higher ed. And so, and this is where I sort of plan to go right now, students and parents are free to choose the kind of career that they want.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not a national objective anymore, I don't think. I think it's just a personal career objective.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like also my observation is that with almost after every election cycle, there's part of that process or the campaign agenda for a candidate is to talk about education, to include that as a part of the election. And with almost every government, in my experience, there is a special national agenda about education. I mentioned No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top.
And okay, to be blunt, if we're going to be blunt in this video, I believe they're saying nothing.
Okay.
Bill Bennett was you probably hadn't heard of him, but he was Secretary of Education under George Bush. He was a philosopher, has a degree in philosophy. Subsequently discovered he had feet of clay in another sense. We don't get into that. But as Secretary of Education, he tells this little story. Oh, I thought, well, I can help the nation. And I have this big wheel. I'm the Secretary of Education. I was like, I'm going to steer the boat. And he goes like this. And then after a few months, he realized this wheel is connected to nothing.
Okay.
Well, look, the United States, unlike many other countries, does not have a national school system. We do have, education department at the national level, but the school boards are in control. They determine the curriculum. So if they want to teach creationism, they do.
But given that trends, for instance, like the Common Core, there are specific standards in certain subject areas that are required of not just school in general, but also each grade level.
Right, but that's through. Okay, I'm outside of my area of expertise here in terms of secondary education, but that's through political force. So if you don't do it, you won't get federal funds.
Right.
So, I don't know. I like the idea of a Common Core. I don't like the idea of the federal government mandating it. I think maybe enforcing it essentially through financial pressure. It might be nice to draw up. To draw an analogy to Common Core in higher ed, there was a lot of talk about that maybe a decade and a half ago. And then people started to look at what colleges offer a Common Core, have they been successful? So Columbia has a Common Core that you can access. You can look at it online. I looked at it not that long ago. That's terrific. It's terrific. Okay. You couldn't ask for more. What a great education.
All right.
It was so good, you even had one graduate from Columbia going back 20 years later and retaking those courses again. Terrific things. So colleges can make up their minds. They can look at Columbia, it's free, and if they want to teach it the same way, or not the same way, can't duplicate Columbia. But, if they want to include some of the same materials, they can.
Okay. So my next question is tied to what you just said, or something you said about great education or great curriculum. So in Tony's opinion, from a philosophical point of view, getting back to your area of expertise, in your opinion, what should education focus on to develop in a citizen or in a child to be a citizen?
Broad historical perspective. So you need a curriculum that includes critical history. So you want to retake the history of world world and Western civilization, because we're in the West. So you want to know your own history. Economics. I think it should be required. Okay, economics is actually invented by philosophers, as were all the other fields. Let's not forget that, okay? They originally taught it, as one sort of curriculum at Plato's Academy and Aristotle's as well. So we need to study some of the specialized fields that are derivative of that, and economics is really important. So that, and then you need an introduction to philosophy, and I have a divided sense about this for critical thinking, because critical thinking is not actually philosophy. Okay. Critical thinking says, here are the inputs, and then what can I reasonably conclude from that? It doesn't question the inputs. So philosophy is broad questioning. And you're going to set up in an undergraduate curriculum these broad questions. What is the nature of God? What is the nature of justice? What are the components of an ethical decision? And you don't teach an answer, you teach a method of questioning, and you lay out some answers that have been given. And
sort of a way of thinking about
a way of thinking, yes, a very, very broad way of thinking. And you have to look down the road 20 and 30 years. Some of these situations, some of the questions you put to students, they're not going to get an answer that it's not going to be important in their life for 20 or 30 years. So you have to have that broad perspective. And I think that's actually what's lacking to a large degree right now, because now their perspective is very limited. I need a job when I get out, right? And, it's nice for colleges to teach some of that, but it'd be better if they prepared them for life in a whole series of jobs. They're going to have 3 or 4 careers.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is we need to teach them the skills, provide them with the tools, and examples of familiar situations that they can apply to. So when they are on their own, they can use those skills, tools, to apply to unfamiliar situations or certain situations they find themselves in.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah. And you think that is sort of lacking from the education system?
Yeah, because it's too specific skill oriented, in my opinion.
Okay. Anything else you would think that would be necessary in addition to these 2 areas you mentioned?
Well, not really, but I would like to it's more of a specific thing. I would like to stop people from coming to conclusions too rapidly, which is what you see on the news, and you see in the media, and you see all of these conclusions, and I call it morality made easy, or instant authenticity.
Making judgments quickly.
Yes, and it just is, it's obvious that, let's say, you either for or against abortion, and it's not obvious. It's not obvious.
There are different shades of it.
Yes, and there are different cases, and it's been debated a lot, and you can't just, make your whole being hang on this one question and, try to turn it into something that's essential. I think students should study existentialism. So, that's another thing that young people need. So that's to understand the quest for their own being, and their being unsure about things is okay. So that's a lifelong thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was my last question.
Okay.
The time is up. Thank you very much. I
Okay.
really appreciate this
Okay.
conversation.
Well, let's say goodbye to our audience.
Bye.
Bye.